Welcome to our sewer summit. That's our agenda for the day. We're going to have a great presentation from Jennifer Robinson, who's going to talk the Utah Sewer Management Program. She's from the State Division of Water Quality. We're excited to have her with us. I'll just turn the time over now to Jennifer, and we'll have her presentation. And thank you, Jennifer, for being here.
All right. So I'm going to be talking about the fun stuff, the rules regarding the Utah Sewer Management Program, as well as the permit. So if y'all have essentially a collection system, a sewer collection system, you're actually required to be covered by this general permit, and it is a general permit, which essentially means y'all have the same requirements. So if you're next to someone that's not your same system, you can turn to them and be like, what does the permit say? And they should be able to tell you, or you should be able to tell them, because everybody kind of has the same requirements, which is really kind of nice. And basically some of those requirements will go over in this presentation, but it does apply to basically anyone that has a sewer collection system in the state of Utah that is publicly owned, federally owned, or state owned. So I always like to kind of joke with my brother because he is over the parks, and essentially I get to regulate him, but yeah, we don't talk about it too much. As long as he doesn't have a sewer overflow, we're good. So reporting, your permit does require you to report. And part of that reporting is basically anything that is a class 1 SSO. So a class 1 SSO, the rule reads really interesting to me because I am a regulator and I read things a little bit like an engineer because I'm also an engineer. And it says basically more than 5 homes, which to me, what does that mean? You can't just have like 5.5 homes, so it's 6. So if you do end up in 6 homes, you need to give us a call. You've got a class 1 SSO. If you end up in a private structure, business, public building, anything like that, that's another one. Did I hear something? Okay, all right. I don't know what that was. And I'm also maybe hearing stuff, but okay. 5,000 gallons. So if you flood a basement, and this is how I read this part of this rule as well, is you flood one basement with 5,000 gallons, this would not necessarily mean that, but if you went into multiple structures, multiple homes, and it equated to 5,000, even if you didn't capture that 6 home capacity, you would need to give us a call. And then we've got waters to the state, and then everything else. And that everything else, essentially, when we're reporting, is basically on an annual report. So I think my former boss, I should say, not my current boss, but my former boss was kind of being fun when he wrote the rules. And he said, basically, everything needs to be reported on the annual report, which is due on April 1st or April 15th, which is also tax day. So easy to remember, tax day and USMP annual report are due on the same day. The class 1s are required to be reported within 24 hours to the Division of Water Quality. And again, on the annual report, those class 1s, we do require you to submit a 5-day report, kind of asking the who, what, when, how, where, all of that kind of fun stuff of what you did, why it happened. I always encourage folks to include when did you last clean that line? When was it last maintained? You know, are you annually going and popping those sewer manholes in that segment of line? This all kind of comes into play if we did end up in a compliance issue, so that we have adequate information to kind of provide understanding of, are you actually following your sewer system management plan? So the permit, as well as the rule, require you to have a sewer system management plan, which is SSMP. Essentially, that's kind of just what you're doing on a daily basis, but it's in writing. So you've got that kind of written document that if you got a new person that comes in, you can say, this is what we do for our sewer system. Or if you have something that occurs and you're like, what's going on here? We have our sewer system management plan that we can refer to. These are the elements that are required to be in that sewer system management plan. So essentially, it's your day-to-day activities as well as those larger activities. I also like to say you want to look at like your sewer overflow response plan on a regular basis, just making sure that people understand what they're supposed to do, what they're not supposed to do. If someone has to show up at a home, when they basically show up, what they should say, what they shouldn't say. I shouldn't say recently because it's been a little bit, but we had a mayor at one point say, hey, we're going to make this right on TV. And to some of us, we understand what making it right is. And to other people, they may say my couch in my basement is from when I was in college. So that was it was 23 years ago when before that. So I'm like, I've got a 25-plus-year-old couch in my basement that I know if I had a sanitary sewer overflow, I'm not expecting my community to come in and replace it because it's not worth anything, in all honesty, between the years of being there and then also my kids destroying it they've been around for a while too. So again, just making sure that when we go into homes, people know what they can say and what they can't say. The other part of that is also ensuring that when people come to homes, that they understand what they're supposed to do when they approach a home in the regards of, is this a city problem or is it a homeowner issue? Most communities, very few, we actually currently are in one community that does own beyond the main line. So South Davis Sewer District has, and if there's someone in here from South Davis Sewer District, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but my understanding is they have actually, and Jason's shaking his head, yes, they have. And he's probably like, oh, no, maybe not. But they have taken it, in some cases, all the way to the home. So, but very few that I chat with actually do that. You guys basically take it at your main line and that's what you do. But when you approach that home, making sure that that person that's coming to that home knows what they're supposed to do. I was chatting with a district manager once and she said that someone came to her home and they didn't know what to do. So she basically kind of went through the process of, let's go check the main line. Let's start there because I don't think it's my fault because of the fact that I work in this industry and more than likely I know I'm not putting any bum wipes down my drain, and I'm also doing well about not using the garbage disposal. I always tell people my kids have been told since they could take dishes from the table to the kitchen sink that they scrape everything into the garbage. We don't use our garbage disposal except for my husband on occasion, and he now doesn't get to do that anymore because of medical issues either. But so again, those are things that we want to also ensure that folks within our community are aware of. So years ago when we were putting this program together, essentially I put a do's and don'ts, and I think that the trust has a do's and don'ts kind of pamphlet as well. It's probably very similar to the one that I put together. I plagiarized it from someone else, knowing me, because it's not really plagiarism because we're all public entities. But at the same time, it's just that what do you put down and what do you not? We have a lot of communities that have multiple languages. So they'll have one in English and something in a different language depending on the area. So if they have an issue, that area that they think, well, they might have other languages there, they can put that hang tag on that door and get people to understand what they should and shouldn't do, as well as a lot of people will just put pictures, like don't put these things down, which is also very nice. The fog control plan, this one, as well as the next one, the sewer capacity and assurance plan, these two are only meant for the kind of larger communities. I think it says 2,000 connections in the rural and permit. But it's also another area that I always encourage people, if you have either a master plan or you have restaurants in your service area, the CCAP is essentially a master plan for your sewer. So if you have something like that already in place, you've met the requirement. The fog control plan, if you got restaurants in your community, more than likely they have the potential to impact your sewer system. And very rarely do they not impact your sewer system. I've been to a couple of restaurants where I was really impressed with the fact that they had awesome BMPs in place, and they weren't impacting the sewer system because of those BMPs. But again, a lot of times you need to have either an under sink trap or an interceptor that's in the ground that can handle that larger volume. I always like those larger interceptors because they can go longer. You can't require anybody to do anything unless you have it in rule. A lot of you guys do. And that's the nice thing is you can say, hey, if you're a restaurant or if you're a building and we believe that you might have a restaurant coming into that building, then we're going to require you to put an interceptor in place. Some folks have kind of gotten burned by that, where initially they say, no, nobody's going to come in here that's going to have a restaurant. And then all of a sudden you got a restaurant in there and they're cutting concrete, or they're frustrated with you because you're requiring that. So initially I've got a lot of folks that I've been told, nope, if there's a storefront, they get an interceptor, because we can't rely on someone saying it's not going to happen. But again, that's part of your sewer rules that, again, you're required to kind of update and have part of this. A little bit more detail on the SSMP. Essentially, you need to have something in place that kind of has that, how often do I clean? How often do I TV? And then where are my problem issues? So generally speaking, one reason that this rule came about was because EPA came in and said, hey, we're going to make the state of Utah go through and inspect some basically collection systems. So we went out and we inspected Salt Lake City, Orem, Provo, Logan, and I think that was it, if I remember correctly. If I forgot anybody that got inspected, raise your hand, because that was painful for me, as probably as well as for you, but it was really interesting. The other thing is all of the photos in my presentation are of events or people cleaning in the state of Utah. So these are either things that I was out on. Actually, I think all of these photos are mine, in all honesty. But so if you see something, there's a story behind that. But at the same time, knowing where those hot spots are, knowing the frequency of cleaning, I've actually had folks say, thank you for this program, because my city council, my district, most of the time, not districts too much, but sometimes city councils are like, hey, do you really need to clean that line once every 3-5 years? Do you really need to TV it once every 5-10 years? And the gentleman that came up to me said, thank you. My city was about to try and cut my budget on cleaning, but I told them there's this lady at the state that if I don't clean and we have an event, we're going to have to we're probably going to be in an enforcement action because we won't have the record that we cleaned per our SSMP. So like I said, sometimes rules are good. Requirements or regulations can help you. And just remember that if you do have a city councilor or someone that's like, hey, do you really need to clean this often? And it's like, nope, we do, because if not, we can get in trouble. EPA actually came out, and one of the reports that we wrote was for one of those communities. I'm not going to throw them under the bus, but they had a great program. So all of the programs we went to, we got really lucky. They were really good. They were doing their requirements, and they were also a little bit larger, so that was beneficial too. But at the same time, when I wrote the report, the requirement with EPA that time was that I would write the report, we would share the report with EPA, they could comment on the report, and then we would move forward with submitting the report. So because of that, it took a lot more time. So some of these folks were like, hey, when are we going to get this report? I'm like, it's coming. I promise it will come. But one of those reports, they were cleaning, and I can't remember if it was 3 to 5 years. That's kind of the standard, is anywhere from cleaning 3 to 5 years and TVing anywhere from 5 to 10. I know there's some folks in here that are cleaning every 9 months, and I'm like, wow, that's impressive. They say in their SSMP they're cleaning yearly. because just in case something happens. But EPA looked at this report and said, based off of what we're seeing, we believe that cleaning needs to be once basically 50% of the system every year. So essentially, you would be on a cleaning cycle of basically a 2-year cleaning cycle of all of your collection line. So I actually grew up not far from here in the foothills of Bountiful, and that has a really nice slope. And I couldn't imagine telling the district manager at that time, hey, Dal, I know that you got a nice slope on a lot of these lines, but EPA is saying that you have to go out and clean this often. And he would just look at me like, you guys don't know what you're talking about. Like, you don't understand how this works. And it's like, no, I do get it a little bit. I've never worked in your guys' industry, but I do have a certification. But at the same time, I'm like, no, I do get it. EPA is the one who's telling us that. And so we actually pushed back at that time. I'm grateful for my management at that time because I said, well, I'm not putting this in this report. This community had a hotspot list that was 6 pages long. They knew every little area that could potentially off gas, had bugs, anything like that, and where they needed to go and when they needed to go to prevent that problem from being an issue for their community. So luckily management agreed, we sent it out, and we basically told EPA if they thought that was necessary, they could make that recommendation, but we would not be doing that because that community, again, had not had an SSO in, I think it was like 10 years. Ironically, shortly after that, they had a couple, but it was, yeah. But at the same time, those things happen. And that's why we have the SSO class 1 and class 2 set up the way they are. We want to know about the big things. We want to know about every EPA wants us to know about everything. And that's why on the annual report, you have to submit everything. But at the same time, there's certain things that we don't need to know about immediately. So the other part of the rule that you do have, you need to have that improvement plan, basically capital improvement plan of what you're going to replace. Coming to training, making sure that you have adequately trained staff. That is part of the rule. And then also having an inventory of what equipment you have on hand and what parts. This doesn't mean that you have every part that you need. I had one community tell me that they kind of have the local plumber who has a lot of the parts, and they can call them up and say, hey, we need this. So they have pretty much everything. So it's not that you have it, but that you know the parts that you need available to you. So the other big thing about this is ensuring that you document it. So a lot of times, thanks, I know I wander. I need to make sure I get my steps. That's part of it. No, I'm just kidding. But again, if you don't document it, it's like you never did it. So that's the very one of the things that we really were impressed with. A lot of the folks that we inspected before the rule came about, they already had really good documentation. They had documentation of, hey, we got this call. It was about the sewer. They put it in the file for the sewer. So we had all of these records that we could review. And then we could actually kind of crosswalk a little bit with their hotspot list, or no, this wasn't a mainline issue. This was actually a lateral issue. And the other thing about lateral issues is those are not your responsibility. So just be aware that if you do have an issue that's an ongoing issue with a lateral, we encourage you to reach out to the health department. Again, if it continues to be an issue, then sometimes the health department gets a hold of us regarding some of those, as well as sometimes you all have given us a call. And then sometimes I've actually gotten homeowners giving me a call because it's a rental property. And then I, again, just refer those to the health department. But if you do have challenges where you're like, wait a second, this is releasing to a gutter or into a waterway, we do want to know about those. But initially, we do kind of say, talk to the health department. But if it's not getting resolved, please reach out to us as well. Again, some of these are in apartment complexes, trailer parks, industrial parks that you guys don't own, but they're impacting the sewer system, which then also impacts public health, the environment, and we do want to be aware of that because that is our mission, is to protect all of that. So just making sure that you've got that documented, all of these things are kind of taken care of. And then if you need to report it to the division, if it's a class 1, also at the end of my presentation, I have the spill phone number. So if it's one of those big ones, we do want you to give our spill line a call. And then also just all of that fun little documentation of why it happened, what happened, and then put that into a document that if we did come out and do an inspection, you would have that available to us. And then training, again, like I mentioned before, that district manager having to train that person that had never been to a home, to be able to say, hey, let's go look below my home. Let's pop that manhole. Oh, there's flow coming out, or there's flow going by. But then going, oh, okay, I know what happened there. That's all good. And then going to the above one and seeing that surging occurring, and it's like, okay, you do have a mainline issue. Thankfully, it's not ending up in my basement yet, but at the same time, it's something that you need to take care of on your part. But then, like I said, just making sure that you have adequate training, as well as the other part I always like to mention is, how many of you guys are on call? I've been on call in the past. That's why I always raise my hand. And what does that mean? Essentially, you're available to respond, right? My duties when I was kind of dealing with spills and stuff like that were basically, if I got a call, if it was a big event, I would go out. I've walked many streams. I spent my birthday on a waterway when I was hoping to be out skiing. But at the same time, that's kind of what happens, right? When you're the one who's on call that week, you get the call and then you get to go out and do those things. But again, just making sure that we are responding to things, as well as if you're the I'm gonna mess this up because my brain's all over the place. The DRC, that you are available. So again, if someone calls you that doesn't know what to do, like what happened with that district manager, that you are available to either walk the person through or be like, okay, I'm coming out, I'll help you. It sounds like we've got an issue, and we need to get more involved. The fog control program, essentially, again, it's a documentation, kind of making sure that you've got those hotspot areas located, as well as if you do have an industry, meaning a restaurant. In my other role with the division, I'm over the pretreatment program, and anybody that is not a home is considered an industrial user. So restaurants are industrial users. But if they're having problems and they're causing you problems, then that's one thing that you get, like either someone like me involved if you don't have an approved program, or if you're within a community that has an approved program, then you reach out to the pretreatment coordinator in your service area and say, hey, whoever, please make sure that this gets resolved. And you do need to be providing that notification of like, hey, we've got this industry that's having a problem, they're causing blockages, because that is a violation of the pretreatment program. And there is the potential need to kind of do some type of action against that industrial user that's causing potential problems within your community. The other part of this is, I always say, do outreach to your residents, providing them information, whether it's at a county kind of event or a city event, making sure that they understand, like, hey, please don't do these things. Don't put flushable wipes down, even if it says they're flushable, but most of them, they're not flushable. They claim to be, but they still cause problems within the sewer system. The other part is making sure that people know how to handle their grease. Like I said, my kids already know, scrape your plate before you put it in the sink. Try and get as much off as you can so that we're not causing problems in our line, but then also we're not causing problems in our in the main line within our community as well. So just making sure you, and then like I said, the enforcement authority, if you're within an area that has an approved pretreatment program, you still have enforcement authority to do what you need to do. If you wanted to take action and the pretreatment program was unwilling to, that is something that you're supposed to have because of this program. And then again, if you're having challenges and you want to get the division involved because you're in an area that doesn't have an approved program, we can get involved. But you all should have enforcement authority to go out after any industrial user that's causing you problems. So homes, restaurants, kind of already went over that, but I had to throw my picture in of, guys cleaning the sewer line. Again, if you're having problems trying to figure out where the problem is, dye testing is a great option. Sampling is another one that we do on occasion. If we know that there's an issue, we'll do above and below sampling to find out what's going on. I actually went out on an SSO. It was during a major storm event. The homeowner walks out and basically says, "What's going on out here?" Me and the sampler are there taking samples. And she's like, they're discharging from the sewer system right into the waterway. And I said, well, the community gets to choose what they want to do in these situations. And I said, there's two options here. They can continue to allow it to go into the sewer system and flood homes, or they can divert it into essentially the waterway because of the fact that they have a lot of I&I. And as soon as I said she was the first home that probably would have gotten flooded, as soon as I said it could end up in people's basements, she turned around and went back into her home, and she was fine with the fact that it was going out into the waterway. Ironically, though, we were actually taking above and below samples from that SSO, and the below, because of the amount of water that was coming through probably the collection system as well as because of the event that was going on, we were finding that actually the waterway was being diluted. So we really couldn't find impact, but there were farms above that were flooding as well. So that probably attributed to the E. coli numbers being higher than below the SSO. But again, that is one thing that we encourage you, and that's actually part of like the SSO response kind of information, is that if you have an SSO that you know is occurring, to take a sample. And we also encourage you to take a sample above and below so that you can kind of show like, hey, like this is how we impacted the waterway. Or like I said, in that event where there was a lot of I&I in that sewer system, as well as a lot of other things occurring, they were actually diluting. The other part of dye testing that I like to mention is when you get a new restaurant online, dye testing, making sure that maybe the bathroom waste is not going into that interceptor. I was chatting with one of my counterparts in pretreatment, and they were at I think it was a Maverick before it opened, and they turned it on, and ironically, the bathrooms were going into the interceptor. So they're like, hey, you got to replumb this, cut concrete and get it going to the right place. I've also talked with a plumber once that they're like, oh yeah, basically, if you go to this restaurant, because it wasn't far from my home, in a community I travel to quite often, and they said, yeah, the reason why that interceptor smells so bad is because, unfortunately, they've got the bathroom waste and the kitchen waste going out to their interceptor. So they're like, yeah, I'm going in there and cleaning or changing that around and getting that taken care of. And I'm like, well, I'm glad that you're fixing it. But it was after the fact. And again, a dye test could have prevented that, right? And so that's something that you should look at and potentially incorporate into kind of that check off list of when you get a new restaurant or industry in place where you're going to require them to put an interceptor in. Again, these are the big things to me that you're making sure that you're doing under the USMP permit. And the rule is make sure that you're reporting, documenting your compliance issues. And then also if there's a large event, give us a call. I always say sometimes in small communities, large events get on news quicker than in the large communities, but either way, if you think that we need to know about something, please just reach out to us. I have a lot of people call me up and say, Jen, what is this? Is this a class 1 or not? And I'm always like, no, it's not, but go ahead and document it, put it in your annual report, and even put on your annual report that we discussed it. One of the ones that I was the most frustrated was when this rule went out. I kept on saying, I don't think we want to do the industries with basically you go into one industry and you have to report it. And sure enough, within a short amount of time after this rule going in place, we ended up in basically it was a sampling area for an industry that I had been in, and it just burped essentially. And unfortunately, because it burped, they had to give us a call, and it was a class 1 SSO. And I was like, this is why I didn't want this. But, management gets to do what management wants to do. But at the same time, those are, even when they just have small things that end up in public buildings, businesses, those need to be reported as a class 1. Maybe one day we'll get this rule changed and I'll get my way, but not today, and probably not anytime soon. Probably be after I retire, but sorry for all of those that are here, but I got too much on my plate, as do all of you probably as well. But the other thing I always like to mention is safety. Again, if there is a safety concern, please go out in pairs. I've always, I was at an industry, they popped the manhole, and it was at a shop, and they're all sitting, they pop it, they sit around, and they're all looking in, and then they say to me, Jen, why aren't you looking in? And I'm like, I'm waiting to see if one of you falls in so I can go over here and call 911. None of them tested that environment before they popped that manhole. None of them tested the environment after they popped the manhole. There is too many potential safety issues. If you pop that manhole, and I know some of you guys don't have that kind of stuff, but you should advocate. And if you need me to call up your city council and say, no, your guys need this. We have had people go out on sewer calls and die in our state. So please don't be that person that shows up, and also go in pairs just in case something happens. Like I said, I think I was with, trying to think, 2 city workers, 2 of the industry, and maybe even more. So there was at least 5 of us, if not more. And like I said, I'm like, yeah, I'm going to just sit over here for a few minutes and see what happens. And they're like, but I did, that's my other, I'm that type of regulator. I like to see what y'all do, and if you do it right, and then educate. But at the same time, that's what we need to do, is kind of see what people do and then educate. But at the same time, I kind of thought that it would be safe. But at the same time, you never know. You really never know. And some of the areas, when I chat with some of you folks, the residential areas are sometimes the kind of most concern, because you get that belly, you get that debris, and then you get that gas. So just, again, be cautious when you're out there. And if you don't have a gas meter to test the environment, pop it, stand back for a little bit. I don't know. Maybe some of you guys have better ways to deal with it, but at the same time, if you have that situation where you need to look in and you've got a homeowner that's concerned, I get it, you need to look in, but at the same time, please protect yourselves. And with that, I think I'm done. Yep. So I've got a new phone number. It's been new for a little bit, but that is a new phone number. So if you've got an 801 number, that is no longer valid. So call me if you have questions about, hey, is this a class 1? Is this a class 2? We have those conversations. I just say, if it ever hits a waterway or a wetland, it's a class 1. Just know that. But at the same time, when you have a class 1, I always encourage you guys to just call our emergency number. Just call them, but then also follow up with me, because I'm the one who's going to say, do this, this, and this. Most of the time I send emails, and then you have it well documented of this is what it's expected. The other thing is your permit says that you have to get us a report within 5 working days. I usually put that, or 5 days, and it just says days. And I think yeah, it does not say working days. And so our enforcement team will kind of look at that as being 5 days. If you get an email from me, I always put it at 5 working days. And I will actually say, get this report to me in the mail by this date. But and always put it US Postal Service because it's the date that it's stamped. But then I'll also request that you guys send me um basically an email with it. But at the same time, like I said, rather than having it, we've had some of these that happen on New Year's Eve, Christmas Day, Christmas Eve. And it's just nice if you get a hold of me. Most of the time I'm going to say, hey, you let me know, and then I'll send you an email. And then you've got that little thing to say, Jen said, and I'll fall on my sword when someone says, why'd you do this? And most of the time they really don't care. But at the same time, if you don't give me a call, if you just call the spill line, just know that it is going to be 5 days and not 5 working days. And sometimes I'll even consider if you guys work Fridays or not. But with that, y'all have a great time.